Valentine's Day is just around the corner. It will always be filled with shades of pink, flowers, chocolates, romantic movies, and wine, and images of a magical baby boy who flies around shooting arrows at people. Yes, I'm talking about Cupid. Whenever you hear his name, what comes to mind? A chubby winged baby with a bow and arrows? Sappy, hopeless romantic love cards and chocolates? Or a cute, chunky whippersnapper who has a propensity to make people fall in love? Well, what if I told you you don't know everything about him? What if I told you he had a dark past and mysterious powers? Stick around and maybe we'll find out who he really is. Or maybe he'll remain a chunky flying baby forever in your minds. This is the true and real story about Cupid. In classical Roman mythology, Cupid is the god of desire, often portrayed as the son of the love goddess Venus and the god of war Mars. In a Time magazine interview, Richard Martin, a classics professor at Stanford, says that in the Greek literary sources we have, he's depicted as unconquerable. So whatever he wants to happen, happens, and he causes disaster. He is often shown wearing a short tunic and sometimes has a small quiver of arrows at his side. He is also often depicted with a wreath of flowers around his head. Cupid's appearance varies depending on the artist or the author's interpretation of the art and the literature. Some depictions show him as a handsome young man, while others as a baby or a cherub. Cupid is winged allegedly because lovers are flighty and likely to change their minds. Have you ever wondered where did Cupid really come from? Well, the answer is he was translated in the Hellenistic period. That's right, he was translated. The original Cupid was more of a heartthrob than a cherub. He traced back to 700 BC, and this character of legend was once called Eros. Eros was a Greek primordial god. In the Archaic period, the son of Aphrodite, the goddess of love, would play with the hearts of mortals and gods to cause mayhem. Depicted as a young man in his late teens, he was considered both handsome and threatening because he would use his power to make people fall in love. And when the Romans adopted the Eros mythology, like many other gods, they changed it. They chose to bring over the more recent iteration of the god as we know it, the chunky little cherub. But why? I pray that love may never come to me, with murderous intent in rhythms, measureless and wild. This is but a translation of a Greek prayer by Euripides. This illustrates well how people were literally praying to save themselves from the power of love. Eros was too powerful to be recognized as a symbol of love. People were intimidated by this sexually dominant, controlling man who could strike people into falling in love with one another. So when the Romans adopted this god and depicted Cupid in their own art, he was often shown instead as a very young child. He was increasingly portrayed as playful and mischievous, and because of his love powers, hence Cupid was born. This is a phrase you have heard many times. It was a proverb that dates back to the 1400s, but its origin, well, it goes way back. For love is blind all day and may not see. This unpopular expression is first found in Geoffrey Chaucer's The Merchant's Tale, written in 1387 to 1400. The proverb was further popularized by William Shakespeare, who used it in many plays and created the phrase, "Love is blind." And yes, it's also related to Cupid. This is the story of how love became blind. The story of Cupid and Psyche. Psyche was the most beautiful woman in her land, and men traveled from faraway lands just to take a glimpse of her. This infuriated Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty and the mother of Cupid, because her temple used to be flocked to by these very men just to admire her beauty. But when people learned about Psyche, she started getting all of the attention instead, and Aphrodite was neglected. Cupid, being an obedient son, went to shoot an arrow at Psyche as he spotted her looking at the ugliest man in the crowd outside of her house. But the moment he noticed her, he dropped the arrow, which fell on his own foot and made him fall in love with Psyche. But he knew that he could not marry her because that would simply crush his mother. And he also knew that he could not because he was a god and she was a mortal. So night after night, he went to see Psyche without showing his face. Psyche got a feeling that she was being watched and perhaps maybe even by a demon. She got the feeling though that he was hiding something else. She could make out some visible features and decided he was possibly even decent looking. So she decided to use an oil lamp to watch him one night and realized that he was Cupid, the most handsome god and, in fact, not an ugly demon. Cupid had been found out, and when he realized he was being watched, he was startled, and that caused Psyche to jump in fear, which led to hot oil flying out of the lamp right into Cupid's eyes, causing him to go blind. After becoming blind, Cupid still would run or fly around, shooting anyone and everything in sight seemingly at random. The problem is, he forgot to shoot the other person too. So you had a bunch of people out there falling in love, never to be loved in return. Sadly, Cupid doesn't always cause love. There's another side to this deity. Cupid sometimes plays pranks on both gods and mortals by making them fall in love with the wrong person or causing them to be unfaithful. This aspect of his character represents the playful and unpredictable nature of love. In his bow, he carries two types of arrows, the golden-tipped arrow and the lead-tipped arrow. A person wounded by the golden arrow is filled with uncontrollable desire, but the one struck by lead feels aversion and desires only to flee. This can be seen in the story of Apollo and Daphne. It is a story describing what happens when lust faces rejection. It's a tale about the power of love, the power of Cupid, and one who is powerful enough to blind the most mighty of Greek gods. In the myth, Apollo falls madly in love with Daphne, a woman sworn to remain a virgin. Apollo basically becomes Daphne's stalker, who refuses to accept his advances. Right when he catches her, she turns into a laurel tree, a scene famously depicted in Bernini's Apollo and Daphne sculpture. So in this brutal way, Cupid causes many heartbreaks among people, making one love someone, yet the other hate him. He plays with people's hearts and causes chaotic and unnecessary cases of love. From a masculine, handsome medieval man to a chubby boy, this was one heck of a transition. Cupid was a god, painted or carved in stone and in literature and art. But then the Englishmen arrived. In the late 1700s, Cupid finally transitioned from high art to greeting cards when the first commercial Valentines cards began popping up in England. But these cards were too expensive for people to send to one another. So truly, the beginning of Cupid as a mascot began at the start of the Victorian era. Esther Howland changed the Valentine's game when she started hand-making cards at home in 1847. Cupid, of course, was another familiar figure on cards from this era. So in this way, Howland was one of the main reasons that Cupid started showing up on Valentine's Day. And in 1906, a manufacturing company called Hallmark made Cupid a celebrity and printed him on thousands of cards in 1,000 different ways. And this is how marketing and business transformed a god into the mascot of love. If you're into horoscopes, you might have seen the sign of Pisces. If you haven't, it's a constellation of stars in the sky showing two fish tied by a love ribbon. Have you ever stopped to think what these two fish actually represent? According to the Greeks, they are Cupid and his mother Aphrodite. They turned themselves into fish to escape from the monster Typhon, and then they connected themselves with a ribbon to avoid being separated. The two fish that form the constellation of Pisces swim in different directions, bound by a cord. One fish faces east and swims upward, while the other swims west and horizontally. The ancients saw this as representing the dual nature of the constellation and the duality of human emotions that we find in Pisces. This is the dual nature of the sign, with opposite qualities that cross but are bound together forever. So no matter how far or how different they are, they will always be connected by love. Who is Cupid? Cupid is the symbol of love. So take everything that I said about Cupid and simply replace it with love. Love is powerful and bonding, sometimes mischievous and chaotic. Love becomes blind many times, causing people to lose their senses and, quite frankly, act like idiots. At other times, it's hurtful and full of pain and suffering, just like Apollo and Daphne. It can be immoral and unethical. But in the end, whether you look to the stars or at the mirror, even if you're millions of miles away from someone, going in different directions like Pisces, or in your lover's warm embrace, love finds a way to connect you, just like Cupid. Thanks for watching, and happy Valentine's Day.